up in this space, I do invite you to roll those shoulders back, to feel your buns in these seats, to close your eyes if you'd like, just kind of continue to be here. I know for me, it often takes me a while to show up wherever I am, so I invite you to continue to do that as we settle into this time together. I had a week off of vacation, and it is lovely to be back with you today. And looking at the calendar, friends, we are halfway through July. We are halfway through July. I just can't believe that. And we do continue into this conversation, our summer series of collaboration, of exploring our yes and how we collaborate. And some of the themes that we've already touched on, if you've been around or tuning in, if you've been traveling but listening, we've explored how to collaborate with God's Spirit. On Pentecost Sunday, we talked about that. We've talked about collaborating with food, collaborating with all that we have been given, also with our bodies as whole embodied selves. We've named the cost of saying yes, what that means particularly for us here at Salt House. And last week, yes, we talked about vocation. Last week, we had Pastor Shelley Brian Wee here, which was awesome, on this invitation to see how and where our great longings meet the world's great needs. And the hope in all of this, we're in this conversation. There are at least two things that we're hoping for. One of them is to see how the Jesus story is a story of yes and then also to see our own stories as filled with yes ands, so that we would be reminded and grounded in our yeses that we've lived so far in our past, just owning our stories, as well as fuel to pay attention to the fresh yeses we're invited to say now and in the days and weeks and years to come down the road. So we're kind of hoping for both of those things to continue to be a part of this conversation. And today we really make time to explore this second thing that I've named, to explore our own individual stories of yes, that hopefully already have been getting stirred up over this conversation this summer. We do have a core practice here at Salt House. We name that Stories Matter. So we find ways to hear each other's stories, to name that owning our own stories is important, knowing the Jesus story is important. And so today we name also it's important to write about them too. So hopefully in your bulletin you received 2 pieces of paper, or if you saw things in our e-news, like you were encouraged to bring a journal if you have one. If you're going, I didn't hear that, it's like, we'll open your email next time, and then you'd get that heads up. If you have paper and hopefully a pen, Jason's going to be walking around if you need anything. We also have some hard surfaces if anyone needs any of those. So give a hand up if you need any of those things. People tuning in online or listening, I encourage you to kind of locate those supplies if you're able to, not if you're driving and listening in the later time. But just to get that for where we are headed today. We have it because we wanted to make room for writing our stories today. So we're going to have a chance to write about one of our yes ands. So we're going to have a writing prompt in a moment to help us consider one yes and that we've said in our lives. And we've never tried writing like this before on a Sunday morning, so we love to experiment with things here at Salt House, as you know, and so this is another experiment. But we do like to do things together. I mean, I've said I never want people to walk out the door going, oh, that was interesting, and then that's kind of it. We want to experience something here together of God, of each other, of the sacred, and so today we tried this experience and this experiment of reflection on our lives as well as writing together, because reflecting and writing and journaling are such deeply spiritual practices. Right? And I wonder, when was the last time that you sat down just to write something just for you? So we make time for this gift together. And really, we'll just kind of start the writing process, which I hope you'll take some time to continue what we start later this week as well. So before we get to it, just kind of an initial way to get into this, there are a few things that we're going to read and a few things that we're going to say before we really get into it. And I want to come back to that welcome question. That really was a way to start our thinking on this, to turn that question into now making a list of things. So we're just going to take 1 minute to just do a quick brainstorm, unfiltered, all ideas are good, of just all the times in your life that you've said yes. Big ones, little ones. I mean, this is like a huge question. I said yes to this donut last week. That was really good. There are all kinds of big things, little things, to a relationship, to moving, to a tattoo, to making a decision about college. I played in the Redmond High School alumni soccer game on Thursday night this week. So the alumni who are around played the existing team, and we won. Mustangs get better with age, we decided. But it made me think about, I played soccer all through childhood, and just how saying yes initially, and continue to say yes to soccer was just a very formative thing for me. So what are some of your yeses that you have? We'll just scratch the surface, but just take 1 minute. And people, again, watching or listening later, it'd be great if you make this list too, but I'm going to time us. let's just take a minute and just see what comes out. Just flow into those yeses that you've said. All right. So whether you have 2 down or 20, that's enough for now, though I invite you to just keep that handy and continuing to add to this list over the next few minutes as anything comes to mind. We're now going to turn to our Bible passage for today, our passage of Scripture. Jesus, time and again, invites us. He invites the people that he meets. We see this, the friends that he has, his disciples. He invites everyone to say yes. And what they are saying yes to, what we are saying yes to, it's described in so many different beautiful ways. And here's one of those invitations that we hear. It's a metaphor for how our yes can be said to God as well. So we're going to hear parts of our text first in just a video, kind of meditative. Let this just kind of be something to receive openly. It's a passage from Matthew 11. And then we'll hear the whole passage read right after that by Sean for us in its entirety. So hear Jesus' invitation to you into your yeses now.
Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Put my yoke upon your shoulders. It might appear heavy at first, but it is perfectly fitted. But it is perfectly fitted. But it is perfectly fitted to your curves. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart. When you are yoked to me, your weary souls will find rest. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. And it is perfectly fitted. And it is perfectly fitted. How it is perfectly fitted to your curves. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. My yoke is easy, my
Matthew chapter 11, verses 27 through 30. Jesus resumed talking to the people, but now tenderly. The Father has given me all these things to do and say. This is a unique father-son operation, coming out of father and son intimacies and knowledge. No one knows the Son the way the Father does, nor the Father the way the Son does. But I'm not keeping it to myself. I'm ready to go over it, line by line, with anyone willing to listen. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly.
I deeply appreciate the two different language, just the way that this passage, the language in these two different versions of just hearing that, if you were able to pick it up in the song, like how this yoke that comes upon us is perfectly fitted to our curves, and I just love that phrase. But then also language from the Message paraphrase here, just really wonderful. So I hold these words from Jesus and then also continue to add to that list or not. Again, in a moment, we'll have 10 minutes to write a brief memoir about one of our yeses, to get specific, hopefully about one moment or a time. So be thinking about what that might be. Just to help us prepare for that, I wanted to kind of set kind of the tone for that and just offer my own kind of story of yes in a memoir kind of way to help. And so I'm going to do something much longer than what you're going to write in these 10 minutes. But this, again, I want it to feel a bit more personal and kind of, again, set that tone for us. So it feels a little more vulnerable to me to share what I'm going to share. But I'm excited about that. So notice what comes up for you. Again, let this be about fueling your own process and be thinking about what you'll be writing about in a moment. So here we go. Did you know that of the men that I have dated, all of their names began with the letter J? 2 Jasons, 2 Johns, and 2 Jakes. There was one beloved pen pal named Daniel and a brief flirtation with a Steve, but the others were all J's. And I was a superb serial monogamist, meaning that I spent most of my life, beginning in high school, with someone, and with someone for a while, for years. And though we know the end of the dating story for me, spoiler alert, it was the second Jason that I said the ultimate yes and I do to. There was a no that I had to say to end up with Jason, and in order to find another significant yes in my life. And it all happened in the years right out of college. I'm acutely aware of how our 20s, as we break up, as we move, find and change jobs, get together, live on our own, and often enjoy the perks of our first real paychecks, it's this crucible for change and transition. It sure was for me. And one piece of that season of transition in my early 20s was indeed in regards to my love life. Before Jason, I dated John. Well, one of the Johns. We met as RAs my sophomore year at Pacific Lutheran University. He was a year ahead of me, and we both made it into the esteemed PLU Choir of the West that year. So we spent a lot of time together, time that was punctuated by the soundtrack and experience of singing some of the most profound and rich choral music I've ever heard in a newly built phenomenal concert hall. Singing with this group provided some of the deepest spiritual experiences of my life, where God felt so close in the beauty of the sound and the poetry of the words we created. So not a bad place to fall in love, right? So then 3 years later, breaking up with John was one of the hardest things I've done. 3 years of dating, 3 years of life, of growing into an anticipation of sharing a life together forever, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not the right match for each other. Now I was a year out of college, and the world felt rougher and colder than the warm safety of the campus at PLU. We often refer to it as the loot dome, this little bubble of safety. On campus, you could feel a little safer in dating fellow students because, you know, they have to have things at least a little bit together to be accepted by a liberal arts college, right? It's like the free screening service the university offers for dating, right? All right, you made it in? All right, well, let's hang out. Okay. I chose to say no to John. And saying no in order to say yes comes at great cost. In the aftermath of our breakup, beyond missing John specifically, I just missed the companionship, the text messages in the early morning and late at night, the familiarity of being physically close to someone, the inside jokes, the being known. As with any breakup and broken heart, it was awful. I felt disoriented to be out of school, out of love, and unsure of what was next. Let me offer an example to emphasize what a low point this was for me. I found myself unofficially stalking John at times, cruising through the Applebee's parking lot where a girl I suspected he was interested in worked, scanning for his car, losing my mind a bit if I saw it there. I wanted to still be on his mind and in his heart, even as I knew that it was not where I should stay. But in the months to come, as I moved through April into May and June, it was the barrenness of myself, the deep loneliness and mystery of not knowing if or who I would love again. I needed to enter into that in order to be open to God, open to myself, open to be loved even if I wasn't in love. I needed to be in that wilderness, though I didn't like it at the time, and I didn't know it at the time. I remember through tears eating a hamburger at that same Applebee's with my friend Carlene, whining out the words, "Will I even find love again? I'm already 23 years old." And it felt so hopeless. In July, the next month, I went with my parents and brothers to my favorite place, a retreat center away from phone and internet it used to be a mining village, but it's now run by the Lutheran Church, Holden Village. I was still weary, still needing time to lay low and enjoy time hiking, reading, and drinking coffee, and enjoying the vast views of the surrounding mountains and the smells of the trees and the ever-present wafts of baking bread. At one of the evening worship services, a pastor from Minnesota gave the sermon and spoke on a text from Matthew 11, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." That preacher spoke of wilderness times in his own life and how it is the times when life is hardest that we hear this invitation from Jesus. Not when we have it all together, but it's in the wilderness. This invitation to receive the tender yoking of our God who is with us. Well, in hearing that, I was a teary, grateful mess. For this reminder did wonders in helping me to feel that tender yoke of God that was in fact perfectly fitted to my curves always, especially now in my own wilderness time. The next day, I was out on the trails surrounding Holden for a run. I had been wrestling with God over the last year about whether I would go to seminary and become a pastor. I'd majored in psychology a year prior, and I'd planned to go to graduate school in counseling after some time off, but I'd taken an unexpected new position working with our campus pastors, Nancy and Dennis, a great clergy couple, in campus ministry at PLU. I didn't see that one coming. I was not on this road to ministry, but there I was, working with students, planning worship, Bible studies, community events. When I started that job that previous summer, initially, I felt poured out and empty, just really spiritually dry from serving others. But I grew into a place of recognizing God in those moments of ministry that was fueling my own growth. But the wrestling continued as I prayed the perfectionist's prayer, which is, "Okay, God, if you can prove to me that I will be a good pastor, then I will go to seminary. Prove that I will not fail, and I will go." So far, God had not given me that assurance of perfection as a pastor. Shocking, right? So as I ran on the trail that day, this question of seminary and becoming a pastor, I'd been holding it for months, which had recently been hard to face, to consider being a pastor in a time when I had felt heartbroken and lost and in the wilderness. As I ran then in the Glacier Peak Wilderness area of the Cascade Mountains outside Holden Village, what I heard so clearly from God was this: "Sara, you can't do this on your own, but we can do this together." That moment was 16 years ago this week, in July of 2002. And this past week, July 2018, I was back at Holden. Though the weekend before, so 2 Sundays ago, July 1st, I was part of a Choir of the West, a reunion weekend. So we rehearsed all day Saturday and then performed a concert on Sunday, back in that same concert hall, yes, singing some of that same God-inspired music with John and with so many others that I had sung with. And so I felt reconnected to this story of mine, the romance of college, the sacred music experiences, the heartbreak of saying no. So we sang that concert on Sunday afternoon, July 1st. That was the same morning that we were here. It was our Independence Day party here at Salt House. It was a busy weekend for me, let's just say that. So then I headed right from here back there for the concert. Then the next morning we left at 5:30 a.m. to go to Holden for the week. So we were there, and get this. So last week at Holden, the same Minnesota pastor who spoke that sermon about being in wilderness times, he was at Holden too. And I got to tell him that not only did I remember what he said 16 years ago, which is like a pastor's dream that someone heard something, right? But not only did I remember, but it had poured water into the desert of my own wilderness time, leading to my own yes to God to becoming a pastor. And it was awesome to be able to tell him that. So then last Sunday, while I was at Holden, it was July 8th, it was the 11th anniversary of my ordination. Ordination is the becoming a pastor worship service. You know, it's the time when you're prayed for, commissioned by God and the people to be a pastor. So 11 years ago, last Sunday, I became a pastor. And I celebrated by going for an epic run on those same trails outside of Holden, remembering my own yes and when I said yes, when God said that we could do this together. It wasn't the promise that I was looking for, that I wouldn't fail, but it was the promise that we would collaborate together. And I could do that. It was a yes and that came out of a hard no, a yes and that I could finally say only when I was in the wilderness, literally and figuratively. For there I was able to hear Jesus' invitation to say yes to that which is perfectly fitted to me. And this week, I've also remembered that I'm not the only one who said yes. I remembered how my story has shown me how complete and unbounded the yes and is that God has said and continues to say to me, which I need to hear again and again. And in remembering my anniversary, becoming a pastor, I also remembered that it is my great joy that I get to embody God's yes and to you here in this new place called Salt House. So in the fall of 2002, so many months after this yes in the wilderness, in my wilderness time, so back then the fall, a little bit later, my dear friend, Jason Bendixson and I, we had our first kiss. That led to many more kisses. But that is a story for another time. There's so much more to this story, many other yeses that were unfolded in this particular season of my life. But this is part of my story of yes and that has been rekindled in me this past week. A part of my story that was so hard, but so good, and for which, especially now, I am so grateful. So that story continues, but that's part of it. And I want to end there now because now it's time for our writing of some of our own stories of yes. I took about 2 hours to write that, and you're going to have 10 minutes. So just some perspective of expectation for what's to come. But please, again, let this be the starting of some reflection that you could potentially do over this next week or in the weeks to come as well. And again, those listening or watching later, if you are driving and have somewhere to be, keep doing that. But I would encourage people listening later, make time for this too. It's just a really good gift. So this is what we're going to do for about 10 minutes. I have some stuff on the screen for us just to shape that time. So first, I want you to describe in detail a time that you said yes to something that felt like saying yes to God. I think there's a slide for this. Thanks. So again, a time where you felt like saying yes, and you could go the real, this feels like yes to God, or it's just a more like playful yes you've said. If possible, drill again into one specific moment. I did a pretty big arc over a lot of time. I could have just done one bit around like my conversation with Carlene crying into my hamburger at Applebee's. So I could have just talked about that. I could have just talked about what it was like to be on that run on that trail when I finally said yes to God. So you can choose like something more bite size. And again, it could be a big, again, the sights, taste, smells, wonderings of that moment. It could be big. Mine was a pretty big one. Or it could be relatively small. I like your favorite thrift store sweater, like what it was like to purchase and discover that. Like tell us that story of like saying yes in that way. So it could be that kind of thing. And again, write in prose, bullet points, poetry. It can be any kind of form that you want it to be. But we're going to do this. Jason's going to start playing some music when we have 1 minute left. When we get to that point, think about kind of wrapping it, and also think about choosing one sentence that you really appreciate, and we'll have a chance to share one sentence after we're done with this as well, if you would like to. And it is getting warm in here. I think it's probably particularly warm right by those windows. If you want to move to a different spot, feel free to get comfortable somewhere else, and give a wave if you need more paper, and we'll bring that to you as well, okay? So let's take a few minutes for writing our yeses together. Yep. So friends, again, I hope this is just the start of some writing that you can do, but we'd love to offer just the chance. We'll kind of just go around the room, and if you'd like to pick out one sentence or two that just in the middle of everything, and we can kind of hear some of those blips, and it'll kind of all string together as our kind of joint memoir that won't make any sense but should be awesome. So if you'd just like to pick something, it doesn't start over here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody?
If I can get through it. Let's see.
Okay.
Is this on? Okay. I remember that night of holding on to my own IV bag, torches all around me, men slipping on wet, muddy rocks as they carried me out. Stars above, mud below, and the trees blowing in the winds of change.
Making a choice to close Trinity Lutheran Church and then opening up to Salt House. It's an absolutely beautiful church now. And I'm glad that we were able to give you the church to
Yeah.
keep going with.
Yeah, we're so grateful too. Friends, this is Vicki, who is a part of Trinity, and she couldn't come on July 1st, but she could come today, and we're so glad that you're here and so grateful for the story we continue to live together. So thank you for that, yes.
The reality was that each time I questioned my yes, something would come up to reinforce how important it was.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, if it would have had been presented to me maybe even 6 months earlier, I wouldn't have been ready to say yes.
I was thrilled to be pregnant, but I did not want to have an only child, so I secretly prayed for twins. Taylor was a very busy, tall boy, and now I am very careful what I pray for.
So good. Thank you.
I'm going to share one. I casually milled about, not trying to look interested, but open to any acquaintances that might become more than. And then I saw her. A brand new 1960s retro kitchen green Ernie Ball Stingray bass. We touched, and I knew she was the one.
Still is. Yep.
God kept pulling me to Salt House, but I was being stubborn, wanting to stay between the two of the churches.
In 1973, it was my senior year of high school at Shorecrest. A big year, a year to decide where I was going to go to college in the fall.
This is about my time at college. Even though the service felt different, the people at the well and the pastor were all so incredible. So I decided to stay, eager to see where the experience would lead.
Little did I know when I said yes to having coffee with Sara that a very difficult and muddy situation would be clear in 48 hours.
I make no promises about coffee, just to be clear.
My neighbors want coffee.
It's hilarious.
Clarity on a run. Just when I thought the only reason why I'm running is for cardio, God gives me clarity.
Thank you, friends. Thank you. Whew. I'm going to zip upstairs with our kids for a few minutes, but I'll be around after the service. And anytime this week, I would love to hear anything that you wrote that you would like to share. So just know that I'm here to receive that as you continue to think about that. Just one final thought for us as we hold all of this. Think about this with me. Our yeses so often lead to transition, right? Like it leads us into change. That's kind of what happens as we say yes and to things. And as we know, transition times are wilderness times, right? In the midst of facing change. So that means that when we say yes, we're choosing in some way to walk into wilderness times, into change, into unknown, into grief and loss, into things being different in some way, even when it is a yes that we're excited about. That's still a dynamic of what happens as we say yes. And I wonder what it means for us to hear our text for today in a fresh way, to hear Jesus' invitation into a yoke that is easy and light, to hear it spoken into the stories that we have just remembered and shared, to hear his words spoken into our own personal wildernesses we might be facing now, to hear it for the wildernesses we're experiencing in our country right now, to hear it spoken into the wildernesses of our wider world right now, to hear these words of come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. It is this yoke of Jesus that we get to say yes to. And it's this yoke that leads us now into the rhythms of grace at Jesus' table. Our Eucharistic minister, Ryan Marsh, he leads us into this response now as we bring ourselves and our written words, our stories with us once again to this table. So friends, I invite you to stand as you are able and to breathe again, to feel still your feet on this floor and to step into this moment of a fresh yes as we come to the table with all of who we are.